Hello, my name is Justin Perkins, and this is another edition of Wavelab Workflows. Today we're going to be discussing automating the parameters of VST3 plugins, and I specify VST3 because this was a new feature for Wavelab 11, and often requested feature, finally added in Wavelab 11, but it is specific to VST3 plugins. So there are some plugins that are still only VST2, which is an older format, which I'll go over that a little bit too. There's some very basic automation you can do with VST2 plugins, but VST3 is really gives you the ability to automate basically every parameter of the plugin. So, if you have an EQ, you can automate the gain and the Q and the frequency point and stuff like that. Whereas VST2, you can really only automate wet or dry balance. You can't really get specific. So we'll get into all that. So VST3 plugins, it's hard to believe this is episode number 24. I've been doing a lot of these. If you have any further questions, I have a website called wavelabhelp.com. So you can go there and download a bunch of my settings and presets. You can rewatch these videos. There's a lot of resources at wavelabhelp.com. We have a Wavelab users Facebook group where you can ask questions, and there's always the Wavelab forum on the Steinberg website is also a great place to ask questions. At the end of this video, I'm going to do a little Q&A if anyone's still watching. So if anyone has any, general Wavelab questions, maybe a little bit of mastering questions, I'm happy to answer those at the end. But basically, we're just going to get into some demonstrating some automation techniques in Wavelab Pro. And like I mentioned, I wasn't really one that was dying to have this feature. I know a lot of people were requesting it. Maybe I just don't do a lot of automation and mastering. I feel like obviously automation is very crucial in mixing, but for mastering, I wasn't really feeling the need for it, but it's nice to have. I did use it recently. I was mastering an old song that had a lot of hiss, and the files were cropped too tightly to really do any noise reduction. It's an old project, long story, but as the song was ending, I was able to kind of roll off some of the high end gradually with an EQ. So that was kind of nice to use for that purposes, since I couldn't do proper noise reduction. But I guess the reason for that is the reason why I wasn't really craving automation as much as other people might have been is I personally like to split up songs. If the intro of a song needs different effects chain, I might just split it up and put a different effects chain on the intro of the song, because I like to just see that it's different, especially if I reopen the song at a later point in time. Sometimes if you have automation happening, it can be more hidden if you're revisiting a project. Whereas if you're chopping up the song into different sections and adding clip effects to each section of the song, sometimes that's a little more direct and visual. And just for those that are new to Wavelab, Wavelab has many places to insert plugins. There's clip effects, which is putting plugins directly on each song or clip. So this is the main version and clean version of a song. If this were an album, let me see if I can open up an album. I think I can open this one. So obviously here's an album layout, so I could put a different plugin chain on each song in the clip effects area. There's track effects, which would be the Wavelab audio track, not the CD track, but the actual audio track, because you can have many tracks in the montage. So I should delete these. And then there's the montage output, which is where I kind of have my final limiter. So the only place that you can automate VST3 parameters is clip effects. When you go to the audio track, there is no lanes that you can open up or see. So you can only do it on clip effects. You can't do it with the montage output, which is kind of like the final master section of the montage. You can't automate that. You can't do it with the master section plugins, with the audio editor or the montage. It's very restricted to clip effects, VST3 plugins, and the audio montage. But you can still do a lot of powerful stuff there, which I'm going to get into. So just wanted to backtrack a little bit. For those that are new to my videos and all this, your Wavelab may look something like this. And you have the inspector over here. Inspector, master section. I prefer sort of an older style layout, which looks like this. Same difference, I just have the master section hidden, and I have my inspector up here, because that's kind of where it used to be back in the day. And you get a little more screen space for the waveforms. So, let's get into it. I did mention that I personally sort of like to chop up the songs if the intro needs a different effects chain. But I'm going to show you how to automate. If you don't want to do it that way, I'm going to show you how you can automate within the plugin. Before I forget, there is this button here for pane visibility. If you're not seeing an automation or envelopes section, you may have it unchecked. As you can see, I have the gain unchecked because I don't use this at all. I keep it locked at 0, so I've just chosen to hide it. So then I have more room for other stuff. So the inspector and then the automation envelope section is where you're going to be really focusing on today. So to add a plugin, I'm going to choose a popular plugin here, FabFilter Pro Q3. So I've added this plugin to the first clip in this montage. So as you can see, if I play this first song, you can see the meters happening. If I play the second clip, it's actually not... with my Wavelab settings, it hides that plugin. But as you can see, it's playing audio, but it's not going through that plugin because we're only inserted on the first song. And I'm going to show you how to copy your automation lanes to the other song, because sometimes people do a main version and a radio edit or instrumental, things like that. So you can copy envelopes over. But the first thing we would do is insert a plugin. So let's say I want to automate one of these parameters. There's two ways to access or add parameters to automate. The way I don't recommend is this menu, because you can see it's going to show me every possible parameter that can be automated, which is apparently 343, which is a lot to look at. So the easier way to add a automation line, and these automation lines work very similar to the volume and pan envelope if you're familiar with Wavelab. The easiest way to do that would be to right-click on something you want to automate. So let's say I'm going to automate the gain of band 1 here. Let me get this back to 0. Sorry, band 3. So I'm going to right-click, and it's going to say Create Automation Envelope for Band 3 Gain. Now, I would probably never do this in real life, but just got to give a basic example. So by doing that, it added this little row right here for Pro Q3 Band 3 Gain. Now we can go to the actual envelope and draw some automation. I can click here. If for some reason I wanted the band 3 to reduce in level, I can just draw it in, and you can kind of see on the screen that you are turning it down. I'm turning it down by 7.2 decibels. So watch what happens when I play the song. You're going to see this start to creep down gradually as the song plays. So yeah, not real exciting, but you get the idea. The thing I mentioned, obviously this is not the best way to do noise reduction, but the other day when I had a song that it couldn't get a noise profile from, I did a little high-end reduction at the end of the song. So I just did this, and I right-clicked, create automation for band 9 gain, and I did something like this where I made a couple points, pulled it down, and then let me undo that, because I probably did something more like this. Just the last note, there's a little bit of hiss from this older recording, and it's cropped too tight to do noise reduction, so I just did something like that. This is not very detailed automation, but you get the idea of where The high end is kind of rolling off as the song fades out, and that helped in that situation. Obviously, you can do all sorts of things with automation. You can increase the limiter gain, the amount that you're driving into your limiter. You can change the attack and release time of your limiter. A lot of things you can automate throughout the song. I honestly tend to just rely on volume automation, which I will show you a little bit later in the video. But now that we have some automation points drawn or added, I want to show you some things about it. The envelope tab is sort of your friend here, although we're mostly going to be up here in the automation and envelope area. Looking at a question here. I'll have to answer that later. So there's a couple options here. Where should I start here? You can, first of all, if you want to delete, if you drew an automation line and you want to delete it, there's this trash can, and I can just delete that. I'll undo it. You can reset it. So let's say you did some automation and you didn't like it. I don't like this dip that I did here. I can just reset it, but try something different. You can also just simply turn off automation. So watch what happens here. Our low mid dip isn't happening. If I turn that off with the power button here and I play into that section, you can see it still isn't happening because it's temporarily disabled. But if I press the button there, and now it snaps in and does its normal thing. So that's a good way to sort of audition your automation with, with it bypassed or with it in to see what you like better. And you don't have to delete and redo and things like that. It's just kind of a simple on or off. Kind of in that area, we have smoothing. So, it's not hard to draw crooked lines like this or real jagged lines. But if we enable the smoothing button, watch what happens here. That it kind of smooths it out to be a little bit more natural, like if you were turning a dial on a piece of equipment, it wouldn't be so rigid. So smoothing is an option that you can turn on or off. And that's per automation lane. Nice to have. You can enter the values manually. So now that I have some points drawn here, you can see the highest value I've drawn for that band changes 4.17 decibels. If I decide I only want it to be 3.17, I can just manually type that in, as well as the time. If I decided that it should happen a second sooner, I could change it to 1 minute and 12 seconds up here in the editor, or maybe 1 minute and 10 seconds, and it's going to move. There's also little up and down arrows. So that's a nice thing if you're getting really detailed, especially if you're getting notes. I have some clients that will give me really detailed notes about some automation changes, and it's nice to have this. And the time, the value can have basically 3 different choices. You can have it be the start of the entire montage, which comes into play more with albums, when you're on song 3 of the album that's further in, or it can be relative to the start of the clip or relative to the end of the clip. So there's kind of three different modes for the time, and it's really your choice as to what you want to use there. So before we get any further too, I want to show one more thing in this menu here. So we have this EQ inserted, and we're going to do some automation. This is, all these, like I showed you, this is every possible parameter that could be automated, which is, like I said, quite a lot, a little overwhelming to look in here, but you can use it. You can select band 2 gain and add it that way too, if you prefer. But also every plugin is going to have these 2 choices: wet and dry balance and host bypass. Not every plugin has a wet and dry or parallel type option. So if your plugin doesn't have that, you can do it here. And then host bypass as well. You would think most plugins would have a bypass option, but there are exceptions. So you can see that with bypass, it's either on or off. So the line is way at the bottom and it's engaged right now. If I drag it up here, you can see that audio is no longer passing through the plugin. And if I snap it down, it's passing through. So those are just some features that are available for every plugin instance, no matter what it is. Let's see what else do I have in my notes here. You can choose to view. Right now, I'm just looking at. Well, how do I have it set here? You can basically decide to only show one envelope at a time, or if I turn this off, it's going to show me a lot of envelopes, but I have to press the little eyeball button. So I'm not doing too much, so everything's kind of at 0. But you know, if you have a lot of automation going on, you can choose to see them all at once. And if you hover over the volume line or the automation line, it's going to show you what it is in the little pop-up. But if you only want to see one at a time, you can press that and then manually select. I guess I don't do enough automation to have an opinion on this, but if you're doing a lot of automation, you may want to only see one at a time to not get confused. But that's just how I prefer to work. You can, I think I've showed some of this, reset envelope, and then you can just totally delete it as well. You can't delete the volume because that's fixed. So you can paste this stuff. So let's say, I'm going to simplify this a little bit. I'm going to delete this. Let's say I just did one change here. I did this reduction of high end at the end. I could copy and paste this. Now I do have to manually add the plugin, and I do need to manually add the line. So what do we call it? Band 9 gain. In this case, it could be faster to go to band 9 gain. Happens to be the last one here. So I can go, there are shortcuts for this, but I can go to the envelope tab. I can copy, and then I can copy the envelope shape from this first version, you know, the main version of the song. Then I can select the second version of the song, which could be an instrumental or a clean or a TV mix or something like that, and paste it. So now this extra version of the song is going to have the same automation. It's a little, there could be some improvements to make it faster, I admit, but basically you don't have to redraw everything. You can, as long as you insert the plugin and add the envelope, then you're good to go as far as just copying and pasting your automation, you know, the envelope shapes and things like that. And even though I'm doing automation here, you can still split your clips up. So let's say the intro needs something different. There's nothing stopping me from splitting up the intro and doing a little crossfade there, and then the intro could have its own plugin chain. You know, maybe it needs a certain aggressive filter or who knows what. Sometimes I get songs that the last section of the song is completely different, and maybe there's too much low end. So I need to do some low end taming that doesn't need to happen on the first part of the song. I personally find that splitting up the song to be a little easier, but that's a personal preference of mine. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, you still can split up. You know, this is one song, but you can split it up into multiple clips. Another question, I'll have to answer that later. You may want to watch some of the other videos about the limiter. You know, you always want pretty much want your limiter to be last, but you want to make sure that there's nothing happening in the master section, because there's a lot that can go wrong here with the fader levels. Resampling can cause peaks. You know, if your limiter ceiling is set to minus 0.1 and you're at a high sample rate and you're resampling to 44.1, you're probably going to get overs. So it's hard to answer that question in the video right now. But if you go to the Wavelab Facebook group or the forum, you can kind of dig in and see what's going on with your setup. But let's get back to this. I've been talking a lot about automating VST3 plugins. And again, you can't do it in the montage output or the track. It's got to be Clip Effects. It's got to be VST3. I am going to talk about the limited automation of VST2. But first, I want to talk about just some general automation things you can do with the volume and panning, because there's at least one feature you should be aware of. So, as mentioned, I do a fair amount of, I should say, any automation I do in mastering EPs and albums is usually just volume automation. I'm not typically changing EQ or limiter settings throughout the song, but that's not to say you can't. I find myself doing volume automation more than anything. So let's go back here. So now we're looking at volume and fades. A couple things to be aware of is the main one is this little icon that could be easy to overlook. This determines if the volume or level adjustment is before or after your clip effects. So that can really matter for dynamics processors. Let's say we have a compressor or a de-esser on this clip. If we change the level of the clip, we do want to be aware if it's happening, before or after our effects. Right now, you can kind of see from this icon that the level changes are before the effects. But if you click it, you can flip it around, and your effects come first, and then the level change. So in other words, I could dial in my compression, limiting, anything with dynamics, and in this mode where the effects are first and the level is second, I could do that, and I could turn this up and down, and it's not going to affect the clip effects. Now, it will affect how much level I'm sending into any track plugins or montage output plugins, but as far as clip effects go, you can decide if they're pre or post volume or gain lines. So that's something to be aware of. This changed with Wavelab 11. It used to be over here, but we can also add a pan automation. So there could be a time where you want to automate some panning just in one particular part of the song. You can change it for the whole song if your song is off balance. You can just obviously do that. Or if there's just one section, if for some reason this was needed to change it. I'm going to also demonstrate another feature at the same time. I could highlight this section. Now if I just grab the line, it's going to be a very abrupt change of panning. It's going to happen. It's probably going to even cause it does add a tiny gradual slope, but it's a pretty hard adjustment. If I hold Command, now it's going to add 2 points in the middle, which makes it a little more gradual. And this works for volume. This works for anything you're automating. If you want to select an area, again, I'm just using the mouse without touching anything. It's a very hard change. Or if I hold Command on them on Mac, then it kind of eases into it. So that is just kind of a general tip about automation and how to draw some lines. So the panning, like I said, you have to add that if you want to do it. And there is a pan law. I believe this is the default setting, which I keep it at. But if you want to change the pan law, which basically determines how the gain changes as you pan things left and right instead of centered, you can change it. But I think most agree that's the default. I did show, I showed it with some VST parameters, but let me reset this. And another general thing I want to show, I've had people say, why can't I adjust the first volume node? It's basically stuck at 0. It's letting me go sideways, but I can't go up or down. And there's a little trick you need to know just for the first one, because it's kind of locked at 0 on purpose. If you hold Command, it's going to let you get it off of 0 dB or wherever it is. So that's just a little trick. But let's say I wanted to bump up the intro of this song a little bit because the mix was too dynamic. So we'll bump that up 2 dB. Let's say this little drop. Sometimes after digital limiting, some of the quieter parts don't seem quiet enough anymore. So I've had to do cases where, let's give that an actual little relax. I've had cases where the third chorus gets too crunched. I'm just making stuff up here, but it does happen. Not every project. So let's say that after I've done all my limiting, that the third chorus feels too crunched. So anyways, let's say I have a volume shape that works, and then of course, let's say they wanted to fade out the song a little better. You can go to the envelope area and again hit copy, and then go over here and hit paste. If you're using my settings, I change it to F1 copies the envelope and Command F1 pastes the envelope. So that's a quick way to copy your, whether it's volume or panning, fades, copy it from one version to another. This is just a single song session. But, like I said, albums are a different layout, but I just wanted to point out that you can copy and paste envelopes very easily. You can obviously right click on an envelope to reset it. Do that. You can move just certain points. I can select 4 and just do that. I could unselect that, and now I just have 3. So these volume nodes really work kind of like anything else you'd expect. I'm holding Shift to just select certain ones. Sorry, I'm holding Command to select certain ones, and I'm holding Shift to select multiple in between, like that. So let's say I have no points selected, and I want to just turn up the second one. I want to turn everything up except on the ends. So I could select the second one, I could Shift select that one, and now they're all selected, and I can go up and down. Or if I hold Command, it's just going to do those. So there's a lot of modifier keys involved with this. Someone's asking, how do you rotate the inspector? Again, this is the default layout. It's been a while since I did it, but basically float or dock elsewhere. It's a little bit like playing a video game here. You got to do that. You got to play around with it a little bit. I don't do it very often, so I'm not good at it, but you can float it alone. You can dock elsewhere. Dock to last place. You can dock elsewhere. It's a little tricky to, I think maybe that. I honestly don't know, but I don't have a great answer, but I know that I've picked this layout and then saved it as a preset. So basically all these windows you can, like this meter, I can float it alone, and I can dock elsewhere. I could have the spectrometer over here. That keeps going up there. But basically you can really customize your layout by right clicking on the header of it, and then once you get it where you like it, you can save it as your own layout. I just prefer this. Prior to Wavelab, I think it was Wavelab 10 and earlier. Sorry, maybe so 9 and earlier, before 10. It used to just have an effects tab up here. Then they changed it to the inspector and had it nested with the master section over here. And since I don't use the master section for plugins, I just felt like that's too cramped for me. So I like to just have this layout and get more space over here. Anyways, getting a little off track. I want to, you can, for whatever reason, hide. Let's go through this menu. You can, reset all, reset to 0 dB. Some of these are self-explanatory. You can hide the nodes if for some reason you don't want to accidentally move them. You can lock them. Here's one thing that's very hidden in my opinion. This comes up a lot, is can you automate the left channel different than the right channel when it comes to, I haven't tried it with plug-in parameter automation because that could get weird, but let me reset this. let's say I want to just turn up the left channel for a part of a song. You can convert this. I would choose different wording, but we're going to convert the single volume line into two lines. So now, as you can see, we have left and right. And now I could zoom in here. Let's say in this little section, we just want the right channel to be louder. And I can even use some of these other tricks to just kind of give the left channel a little gradual boost as the part happens. So it has been handy at times to automate just one channel. Or let's say there's a little bit of talking or something you don't want so loud at the end of the song in the right channel. For whatever reason, you can kind of fade the right channel down sooner than the left. So this little button is kind of handy. I only recently discovered this, relatively speaking. You know, it's something that I had found accidentally, but it is nice to have that. And let's see if you can, yeah. So that's, I don't even know if it exists for, let's say, band one gain. Yeah, it's not even a thing for plugin parameters, but for volume, certainly you can change it to a dual mono setup, which I think is really cool and handy. So I'm going to reset that. I'm going to go back to a single channel. Checking my notes here. Let's go to VST2. I'm on an Intel Mac. My laptop is M1, but this is still an Intel Mac Pro, waiting for the new ones to come out. So my version of Wavelab does load VST2 plugins, and for those that aren't familiar, in your plugin list, if you see the three lines, kind of like the Adidas logo, that means it's a VST3 plugin. If you don't see the three lines, that means it's VST2, and for whatever reason, Universal Audio has not updated their plugins to VST3. Now, they do have the UAD-X, but there's very few plugins that are available. So basically, most of the UAD plugins are still VST2. And you can still do some basic automation with VST2 plugins. Let me load one up here. I'm going to delete this one just to simplify what I'm looking at. But let's load this UAD plugin. You can automate the bypass of plugins. Let me go back here. Some of them have their own internal bypass, obviously, but probably the most direct way is to click in this empty slot instead of, where is it? Yeah, click in here. And you can do host bypass. So again, this is just up or down. It snaps to the top, snaps to the bottom. So right now, even though the song is playing, you don't see any audio passing through the plugin. And now you do. So I could automate that just for, I could say the intro doesn't need this EQ because it's whatever. So I could draw a little point here and another one here. Then I could snap it up to the top. Kind of goof that up. I think they're all selected. Now let's try this. Well, I'm not doing a good job here, but you can. There we go. This is really bad, but you can see that the audio is not passing through the plugin, and all of a sudden it's going to pop in there. So that's one way to automate the bypass of a plugin. Although most of them you would think have their own bypass that you can automate somewhere in these many choices. It just kind of depends how the plugin is designed. If it's, see down here, we have bypass within the plugin. If it's designed after Analog Gear, it might have an on-off switch kind of thing. But there's always this host bypass. So let me get back to VST2. And again, with VST2 plugins, you cannot automate parameters. And with VST2 plugins, if you're in Apple, if you're using an M1 or M2 Mac in Apple Silicone mode instead of Rosetta, Apple Silicone mode will run a lot faster, and it's the new thing. But you can, if you have M1 or M2, you can open Wavelab in Rosetta mode, and that will allow for VST2 plugins. There's still some holdout plugins that are not VST3 yet for some reason. And if you're using VST2 plugins for whatever reason, you don't get much, but if you click on this little right arrow, you can choose two options. You can blend the wet into dry, or you can do parallel processing. Kind of similar in a lot of ways, but still slightly different. This box gives you a little description. I'm going to choose parallel processing. And the only, well, actually, no, I'm going to choose wet into dry. The only option you get with this is you can kind of blend it from, so let's say you dial in some distortion or whatever. You can basically just go to the envelope section, and where is it? Wait, then you have to choose edit automation envelope, and it shows up here. Now I'm blending. It kind of gives arbitrary numbers, but basically, you know, and I don't have it memorized, and I can't hear my speakers or headphones right now, but one way would be, I believe this would be just the dry signal, so you wouldn't hear any of the plugin, even though it's feeding it. And then up this way would be, you'd be hearing more of the plugin and less of the dry. So it's pretty basic, but you can do some blending of VST2 plugins. And that's really the only automation we used to have for VST3 as well until Wavelab 11 came out. So again, this is still a fairly new feature. There's some things that could be added and improved, such as, you know, when you copy a plugin, it'd be great if it copied all your automation points. And because I don't use it much, maybe there is a hidden way that I'm not aware of, but I don't believe when you copy a plugin that the automation is going to travel with it. But maybe someone can prove me wrong. Basically getting to the end of my notes here. So if anyone has any general questions about automation or Wavelab, or maybe even a little bit of mastering, can answer those. Otherwise, as I've mentioned at the start of the video, we have the Wavelab users group on Facebook. It's a great place to ask questions, and I can answer, other users can answer, because I don't know everything about Wavelab. Some people ask about surround sound or this or that, and I really don't know everything about Wavelab. Because I basically just master EPs, albums, and singles for music. I don't get into post-production, surround sound, any of that. And then we also have the Wavelab forum on the Steinberg website, and you'll see some members of the Steinberg team answering there, which is a great place to get direct answers and report bugs or ask questions or feature requests and things like that. So find us in one of those places if you have more questions. And also, as mentioned, there's wavelabhelp.com, the website. Everything's free. You can download some of my presets. You know, we talked about my layout. You can download that at wavelabhelp.com and use it as a starting point. A lot of my preferences, I don't have any, on purpose, I don't have any mastering presets. I'm not going to, you know, there's no way to have a preset for how to master a rock song or a hip hop song or anything. That's all, there's no preset for that, but you can get my kind of starting points for all these settings, you know, metadata, layouts, things like that at wavelabhelp.com. It's all free to download. You can book a session. That part isn't free, but you can book a one-on-one session to go over whatever you want. There's a calendar on there with some available dates. That's a good question. I do think this is going to be a new feature for a future version in the not too distant future. I do think there's going to be a better way to select a clip or a album track and do an offline analysis of the LUFS readings and maybe some other things. But for now, you just have to render the file and then analyze it. So you could render the file, and then you could, let me see if I have something I can open. You could render the file, and then when it's in the audio editor, you could go to Analyze, Global Analysis, So it's a little slower, but all the information is there. But I do think we're going to see a feature where, because it's been requested a lot, where right in the montage it'll just do an offline um, render. It's going to take a while because it has to crunch all the numbers. It has to process all your plugins from the start to the end of the song. So it's not going to be fast, but it will probably give you some integrated LUFS information without having to render a temporary file and delete it. So yeah, that's basically it. I'm a big fan of working in the montage, even for single songs. Even if I wouldn't have an instrumental or clean, even if it's just a single song, like I think this one, I moved it. For me, the montage is the way to go because if you use the audio editor, then you're using the master section. There's absolutely no automation. Any fade ins and outs are basically destructive. So I like to use the montage because then you get clip effects, track effects, output. All your settings are saved. All your fades are totally undoable. There's automation, all that good stuff. All right. Well, anyways, thanks for watching. If you're watching this later, find us at all those places I just mentioned. And we'll be back next month, which starts tomorrow, actually. But later in February, we'll be doing another live stream. I believe it's going to be showing the differences between Wavelab Elements and Wavelab Pro, because that comes up a lot. And while there is a chart, I think it's nice to see it in person as far as what the differences are. So yeah, watch for that next month. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day or evening or whatever you're having.